Okay, great. I'd like to welcome everybody to this panel discussion of the exhibition and related questions. Sopio Gagashidze, who is a graduate student at Rutgers in the Department of Art History, will be moderating and introducing each of the speakers. The show Locating Georgia was a very long time coming. It was one of Norton Dodge's, the collection gathered by Norton Dodge and then donated to Rutgers. It was one of his real, I can say, almost obsessions. He very much wanted to have a major Georgian show. And for Dodge, that might have meant including every single work and covering every single wall in the museum. But strategically, in advising Sopio and other graduate students, asked them to focus on issues that will allow them to curate the collection, because that is something Norton hadn't really done. He amassed what he could, and many of you speakers today know a great deal more about that process than even I do. So in any event, Sopio worked on this for quite a few years, broken up by COVID, and then also by just the difficulties getting works which were split between Norton Dodge's residence and the museum, bringing them here and then conserving them. We aggressively pursue a policy of conservation for our exhibitions. And so virtually every work in the exhibition was examined by a conservator, and most were treated in some fashion. And then framed, we hope, appropriately. So we'll hear more, I'm sure, from some of you about the public presentation of these works and their history. But for now, let me introduce Sopio Gagashidze. I am Jane Sharp. I should have introduced myself, a professor in the art history department and research curator of the Dodge collection. Sopio is a graduate student, as I've said, and a former curator at the National Museum of Georgian Art. And she has had a very active period here at Rutgers, working with us and also doing research in Tbilisi for the show, for the exhibition. So despite her focus on medieval Georgia, she's become more than simply conversant, I would say, in post-war Georgian art at this point in time. So please, Sopio, do begin and introduce our speakers today.
Thank you, Jane, so much for this introduction. I would like to thank our panelists for accepting our invitation and being with us today. And I'm very looking forward to all the 4 presentations. So I also wanted to thank to the audience who are present here and who are watching us. And before I start introducing our panelists, I would like to remind our audience that they can use the Q&A section for in order to ask some questions. But first, we'll have all the 4 presentations, and then the next second part of the panel will be a Q&A. So let me introduce our first speaker, who is Dr. Ketevan Kintsurashvili. She is an independent scholar, educator, and curator, specializing in modern and contemporary art. From 1978 to 2012, she worked as a senior researcher and professor at the Chubinashvili Institute of Georgian Art, the Tbilisi Academy of Art, and the University of Theatre and Film. Currently, she teaches at the University of Georgia. Her monographs on David Kakabadze, Kirill and Ilyas Danevich, Niko Pirosmani, Koka Ignatov, and other artists were published in Tbilisi, St. Petersburg, Warsaw, and New York. She has also authored a textbook on 20th century art. She has taught and conducted research work at Mount Holyoke College, Yale University, and Balliol College in the United Kingdom. She has received fellowships from the Open Society Foundation, IREX Scholar Exchange Program, Salzburg Global Seminars, Oxford College Hospitality Scheme, Fulbright Visiting Scholar Program, Goethe Institute, Polish Institute, and other organizations. She was also the speaker at the AICA 47th Congress in Seoul and the national curator for Georgia at the 12th Prague Quadrennial. Her curatorial projects include Maelstrom, Franz Marc, German Expressionism, and Modernism in Georgia. As an invited curator at the National Museum in Warsaw, currently she is preparing a monographic exhibition of Zygmunt Waliszewski. So please join me in welcoming Ketevan.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for your introduction, for introducing me. So I have to start to speak about the, or
yeah, you can share your screen.
You will present other speakers.
No, you can start. You can share your screen and.
So I have two epigraphs for you. I'll read them. World without art would line itself. It would be confined within the boundaries imposed by simplistic rules. This is why totalitarian regimes, when they rise to power, set out to censor, prohibit, and ban. This is how they destroy ideas, dreams, memories, and the expression of differences which create the fertile soil from which artists spring. By Ben Frank. And another by Joseph Robakovsky, the famous contemporary Polish artist. He says, ironically, the only way to make political art was to exclude politics. By doing that, you were making a statement. I am making my work as I like. It is very hard to explain to Westerners why it is so important to keep politics away, why turning to abstraction, why these neo-avant-garde works were so important and so popular in Central Eastern Europe, exactly because of that. Thus, we start talking about Mr. Deutsch's collection and the Georgian artists in it. Personally, I learned about this collection for the first time in 1995 when I was in America for the first time, and I was lecturing on the Russian Georgian avant-garde art at Mount Holyoke College. One evening, the art critic, Irena called me and introduced herself over the phone. She told me that she was writing an article about Georgian artists for a large publication which was dedicated to the collection of nonconformist art preserved at Rutgers University, and it should be published soon. She asked me to read her article with my observations. I gladly agreed. This was an interesting discovery for me, especially since the works of many artists represented in the collection have been the subject of my research for years. The Norton and Nancy Deutsch collection of Soviet nonconformist art, housed in the Zimmerli Museum at Rutgers University, has no analogues in the world. This collection is important to art scholars not only outside the former Soviet Union, but also for those working in countries, in our case, Georgia, where during the Soviet period, Mr. Deutsch collected the works now held in the collection at Rutgers. It is a unique collection, vital for analyzing the cultural as well as political aspects of the Soviet past in the USSR's non-Russian republics. Norton Deutsch was an economist at the University of Maryland and expert on Russia. As a Ph.D. student at Harvard University, he first visited the Soviet Union in 1955 to study the Soviet tractor industry. In 1960, he defended his dissertation and began to write a study on the role of women in the Soviet economy. In parallel with his research, he became interested in the works of dissident and nonconformist artists working in the Soviet Union and began collecting. He visited Georgia 6 times to purchase art for the collection. So the collection at Rutgers, so they donated the collection, Mr. Norton Dodge and Mrs. Nancy Dodge, they donated their collection to Rutgers in the mid-1990s. In 1995, Norton Dodge co-edited together with Rosenfield a book about his collection. You see this book, From Gulag to Classness, Nonconformist Art from the Soviet Union, which contains a separate chapter entitled Nonconformist Arts of Soviet Georgia, a synthesis of East and West, which is devoted to Georgian art from the 1960s. The author of the article is Dr. Irena Korneychuk. Other authors in the volume also refer to the contributions of Georgian artists. Norton Dodge began collecting the works of Soviet artists in 1962, and over 30 years he managed to smuggle to the US about 10,000 works by up to 1,000 artists from the Soviet Union. Among them are more than 800 works by Georgian artists. Those artists are catalogued as Soviet Georgian artists. Mr. Dodge was collecting works by artists who challenged the definition of Soviet. This richest collection of Soviet nonconformist art, so it covers the years from 1956 to 1991, from the Khrushchev's thaw to the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Dodge collection includes works by artists from Soviet Socialist Russia, as well as from the republics such as Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Estonia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Latvia, Lithuania, Turkmenistan, Ukraine, and Uzbekistan. This makes this collection an incomparable source of studying the work of Georgian artists and puts the art in the broader context of Soviet nonconformist art more generally. The intensity of the Cold War period was somewhat diminished during the Khrushchev era, from 1956 to 64. Nikita Khrushchev's 1956 secret speech at the 20th Party Congress reinforced the early glimmerings of the thaw. The iron door that separated the communist camp from the rest of the world was held ajar. A policy of mild political liberalization brought considerable freedom in the creative sphere. Two events in Moscow played a crucial role in promoting greater cultural experimentation among Soviet artists. First was the Sixth World Festival of Youth and Students in 1957, and second, the American exhibition in 1959. Both improved the Soviet intelligentsia's contacts with the West, including greater access to Western education and art. Nonconformist art in the Soviet period challenged the models of socialist realism. Not only did the nonconformist artists refuse to portray the idealized portraits of political leaders, Soviet people, collective farmers and workers, but rejected the academic style, using rather modernist themes and ideas. This was a struggle for new forms, including collage, assemblage, and abstraction. The study of this collection is so important for the history of Georgian art. The Georgian public is given that Georgian artists are represented in the Norton collection together with nonconformist artists from other Soviet republics, there is an obvious opportunity here to discuss the Georgian contribution in parallel with what was going on the rest of the Soviet Union. This collection is a unique educational tool. In the collection are presented the artists from different generations, but they are all concerned with innovation and renewal. New creative principles connect them and their work. Some were more radical and defined, some less so. Some did not fight with officialdom, and others were officially accepted and successful. This demonstrates the complex relationship nonconformist artists in Georgia had with authorities. Some were officially approved for Soviet styles of work, but rejected for their nonconformist aspirations. Many remained underground and only surfaced during the perestroika period. Some moved from painting to theater scenography, where they found artistic shelter and more opportunities to express themselves. Younger artists emerged during the perestroika period, and there was no interference with their creative aspirations, but they faced other challenges as the country transformed and remained in grave economic and social trouble, and many of them emigrated to the West. So the Dodge collection is a product of the Cold War, and this makes it especially valuable as a historical collection representing a specific era in Georgia's history. The Georgian artists in this collection, their biographies, their values, aspirations are all related to the political and social situation of the country. The collection allows us to visually connect the events that took place in the international political arena at that time with Georgian artistic developments at home. In this regard, the collection is of service not only to art historians and critics, but to scholars and experts in other fields such as history, cultural studies, Soviet politics, democratic development, nationalism, social issues, etc. Artists always show something that is hidden from the eyes of other people, and digging into the hidden helps us to reveal what is underneath. The collection of Norton Dodge can serve as an archaeological tool for revealing our near but already historical past. This collection is the richest material for the study of the Soviet system, including the lives of the Georgian and Soviet people, their mentality, and the connections we can trace from the Cold War era to the present. The period of Khrushchev's thaw found a visible reflection in the creative spheres in Georgia, and it requires study from today's point of view. The collection created by Professor Dodge provides immeasurably great service in Georgian art. The exhibition entitled Locating Georgia Selections from the Norton and Dodge collection of nonconformist art features around 70 works by Georgian artists from the Dodge collection. This is the first show presenting Georgian artists' works from the Cold War period outside the USSR, and this is an important but valuable step for further study and research of the collection, using it as a scientific and educational. At the exhibition, we see works, most of them are made in 1978. The main part of them belongs to the so-called Pop-Art era in Georgian Soviet art and made with collage technique. Giorgi will talk about it and he will explain, I think, that the term pop art is conventional and we use it conditionally in relation to those works. because it was impossible to develop pop art in the Soviet Union, and there was no surplus products here, there, no private production, no one needed advertising, etc. Thus, there was nothing of the cultural arsenal that defined the emergence of pop art in the West. But I want to talk about something what is not presented at the exhibition, but is essential in relation to the collection and history of Cold War art in general. I will return back to the secret speech by Khrushchev, Khrushchev condemned the cult of Stalin and laid the foundation for the era of de-Stalinization. This naturally marked the beginning of the era of liberalization and the slight thawing of the ice. The iron door opened slightly. At this stage, little information entered the countries of the communist bloc, which gave rise to the development of new trends in art. Artists often joke that during this period, they got 15% of freedom, but even this has changed a lot. It was born and became the basis for the emergence of alternative, other underground or non-conformist art. So when the artist goes against socialist realists, formalist techniques come to the fore. During the Stalin era, as everybody knows, formalist artists were punished in the Soviet Union, and the socialist realism was canonized. That's the only method they could use. But what was going on in the West at that time? Formalist scales were the emphasis. So exactly formalist trends were developed in the West, and one moment, please. So when the artist goes against the socialist realists, formalist techniques for during the Stalinist era, artists were drilled and sent to camps for formalist vision and findings. And not only during the Stalin era, but later it happened rarely. What was very important, I talked about the exhibitions, about the exhibition of American art in Moscow in 1959. And this was a very important event in the life of Soviet people. It was in 1959, the United States Information Agency coordinated this American exhibition that was sent to Moscow. During the 6 weeks that the American National Exhibition was featured at Sokolniki Park in Moscow, a similar exhibition was mounted by the Soviet Union at the Coliseum in New York City. The exchange was meant to be a major step toward building better relationships and improved understanding between the United States and the Soviet Union. The exhibition was also a tool of cultural diplomacy against the Soviet communist regime. The United States was selling its lifestyle and its philosophy of government to a people who lived under a totalitarian regime, intending to project an image of a free and peace-loving America in which citizens lived in comfort with all modern modern comfortable surroundings, devices, and so on. But what was the most important event? It was the section of the exhibition, the image art section of the exhibition. Several works depicted the United States as a land with a deprivation or as a place in which abstract art flourished. Something similar happened a few years earlier. In 1956, the American Federation of Arts organized an exhibition of 20th century American painting, which was supposed to go on a tour to Europe. Although the paintings had already been created and were in New York waiting to be shipped overseas, the exhibition was canceled by USIA because of the political affiliations of 12 of the 75 artists represented in the show. And it was said that most of the artists, that those artists, they are communists, and this exhibition was cancelled. In 1959, again, 2 days after this exhibition, the press release was announced in the Congress. It was declared that of the 67 artists whose works had been chosen for the exhibition in Moscow, 34 had records of affiliation with Communist fronts and causes. And so the controversy had erupted between those who wanted to censor art show to include one work depicting only the works depicting America as a prosperous palace, and those who wanted the exhibition to encompass work representative of the American scene done regardless of their political affiliations and beliefs. So only the President Eisenhower decided this question, and he carefully refrained from taking any steps that would smack of censorship. Had it not been President's personal intervention, Congress undoubtedly would have forced USIA to cancel the exhibition. Finally, the art was one of the most popular aspects of the entire show in Moscow. Some 20,000 to 30,000 people waited to line each day to view it. And the Soviet visitors wanted to know what the official American art was, and they expressed surprise when they found out that there was none. The officials at the exhibition commented that the impact of the diverse styles was seen as not as a confirmation of communism, but as a stimulus to immigrate America. The Soviet visitors often seemed confused that American legislators referred to the abstract art as a communist art, while the official Soviet press condemned the same works as the degradation of capitalism. In one of why it is so much connected with the works of Georgian nonconformist artists? First of all, I want to show the work by Jackson Pollock, Cathedral, which was presented at the show in Moscow in 1959, which impressed people most of all. And so they saw that instead of works of this kind, the works like Pollock made, and this was a great discovery for the Soviet art, Soviet culture. One of them was a very famous Georgian artist, and he was famous for that time as well, Alexander Vanzelat. who because that at the end of 1950s, this is his self-portrait. At the end of 1950s, in one of the newspapers published in Moscow, the painter came across an information on an exhibition of American painters organized in Moscow. The information was certainly of a critical nature. The article was appended a black and white illustration, which spectators were viewing some work of an American abstractionist. There was an inscription on the picture, a room of laugh, or the laughing room. And Banzeladze, for that time, knew nothing about either that artist or the artistic trend he represented, but the work drew his attention. It could be the work by Pollock or de Kooning or Roscoe or some others who were presented at that exhibition. And he was impressed, as he himself mentioned in that interview, that picture had taken his mind. He says that dissatisfaction with impressionism, which was allowed in the Soviet Union after Khrushchev's thaw, already existed in him. So this dissatisfaction with this trend. I could not actually stop, he said, and I was kind of driven by something. And that cartoon led him into new direction. He was attracted by color and its structured building with pictorial masses. He found his original path. He created minimalist abstract works like this square and many others, where he combines the abstract expressionist manner of painting with geometric abstract art, and he was influenced and inspired by Malevich as well, about whom he learned for that time a little. And although all these works, like by Malevich or other abstract artists, were prohibited in the Soviet Union in the 1960s and 70s as well, and in the 80s, we could see them at the exhibitions, in the galleries, and so on. And this is why abstract art is one of the most important trends, which is very important to know about it in connection with the nonconformist art in Georgia, and especially about Alexander Banzeladze and some young artists who were inspired by Banzeladze and who often gathered in his studio. Banzeladze was doing it for himself in his studio. Nobody knew about it, only a few friends and of course the members of his the closest people. So in the beginning of 1980s, his aspirations became known to the young artists, and they often gathered in his studio, and gradually he became their teacher. They had a great respect and appreciated in him his individual freedom, respect of profession, his mastership, and so on. And so Banzeladze, who was famous for his as the designer of the book, the illustrator, as an artist, a painter, and a graphic artist, and he received many prizes and so on. He was absolutely unknown for everybody until 1987. When his disciples like Gela and Ilya Zautashvili, Gia Etzgueradze, Guillaume Galoblishvili, and Luka Lasarishvili, their works were presented in Moscow in 1987, so during the perestroika. And so again, abstract art played an important role. So in the late 1950s and the beginning of 1960s, it happened. It was hidden, but it happened. Besides Alexander Banzeladze, Gibson Huntadze worked in this direction and created his abstract expressionist works in late 1960s, 70s, and later. And only in late 1980s, we learned about it in Georgia and in the Soviet Union. And those artists, the young artists and Banzeladze himself, they became very popular abroad as well. And this is one of the most important chapters in the development of nonconformist, so-called nonconformist art in Georgia. And this exhibition was like a bomb for everybody. Why we could see some collages and such kind of works like we call pop artists at the exhibitions of the scenographers, the theater designers, and film designers. And we could see such kind of works until the perestroika period, but the totally abstract works, they were prohibited until then. And abstraction, Georgian abstract art was really such discovery for everyone. Abstract art of that period. The real underground has risen in the surface. Now we see Banzeladze in his studio, and together with Mr. Professor Dodge and Irena Gorneychuk, and again they are together, and he's one of the works by Banzeladze which is presented in the collection in the Zimmerli Museum. So this is, I wanted to talk about something, what happened before the pop artist works appeared in Georgia and were created in Georgia and in the Soviet Union. So this was like Banzeladze. Again, I want to say that this was a very important phase in the development of art in Georgia and nonconformist art. And now I think Giorgi will continue this story about of nonconformist art in Georgia, and he will speak about pop art in Georgia, and afterwards maybe I will return back to some issues which I think is interesting in connection with this exhibition and with this period in the Georgian art. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ketevan, for the presentation. We can return it in our Q&A section. So it is my great pleasure to introduce our second speaker, who is Giorgi Papashvili. Ketevan, I think you can stop sharing your screen.
Yes, okay.
And Giorgi will share his screen. Good.
I hope it's seen.
Yes, we can see. So Giorgi is an art historian and a former photo archivist who currently works in the Department of Modern and Contemporary Georgian Art at the Chubinashvili National Research Center. He's been a recipient of various graduate fellowships from the Georgian National Science Foundation, the Max Weber Foundation, and the Smithsonian Institution. Giorgi's major interest is the art of the long 19th century, as well as art and visual history from a cross-cultural perspective. So, Giorgi, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. I hope it's in and my voice is heard. Thank you. And thank you very much, Sopo and Jane, for organizing this exhibition that we cannot see, but we are lucky to participate in this panel, and thank you for this opportunity. Sorry for my voice. So, to this notion of pop art, I gave the title to my presentation, what was called pop art in Soviet Georgia. Actually, it was not pop art, as we all know, but still it was called, and it's being called yet pop art, quite conditionally. I would like to start with this funny shot that really serves as a marker. And this is, as we can see, like a view from keyhole in the Kremlin, and all the things we are speaking about started after that. So that crucial speech that was mentioned by Ketevan, that sacred document was coined within the party officials in 1955, and it became official in 56 when the massacre in Tbilisi happened, and representatives of the younger generation were killed, tens of them. We can also speak about some sort of Tbilisi or Tiflis culture, and in my understanding, Altovarazi was following this culturally and intellectually. But what was between this big gap of freedom was early 30s and early 50s, at least 20 years that was frozen, and only official art was allowed during that decades. I would share a very curious notion by Václav Havel on his short paper, 6 Notes on Culture. And he defines 3 levels of culture: official, parallel, and unofficial. Obviously, what we're speaking about today is not official, but we can consider them parallel and unofficial at the same time, because nothing is unique and nothing belongs uniquely to one of these. The thing why I'm sharing this demonstration with red flags came to mind after Ketevan's another article, when she writes about the environment in the Soviet Empire, where nearly no colors except for red that was everywhere, especially on that demonstrations. And this is the photo from National Geographic.
Giorgi, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we don't fully see your screen, so maybe you should stop sharing and I'll share your presentation, if that's fine with you.
Okay.
I see it.
I mean, there are some like marks that...
So strange.
Yeah, maybe that's better.
Yeah.
I
Maybe.
cannot stop it, I'm so sorry. It's not responding.
Okay, then maybe you should continue. Or...
Yeah. But do you think the change of...
Oh, I think we lost him. Oh. Maybe we should move on to the next speaker.
Sure. And it might be better, it's probably more stable for you to do the PowerPoints.
Mm-hmm.
Sopio, if you have them all, is that okay with you?
I don't have all of them for all of them, but I have for Giorgi. But maybe it will be fine for Nikoloz to share.
Sure.
I'll introduce to you then, and then return
Okay,
to Giorgi.
so we do it. It's okay for Giorgi?
I think so because we lost him. So
Okay.
so I'm happy to introduce our next speaker, Nikoloz Nadirashvili, who is a contemporary art researcher and curator. And from 2017 to 2022, he managed Contemporary Art Archive, Tbilisi, and worked as a project manager for Oxygen Biennial. Since 2020, Nikoloz co-manages Transcendentalia, an art program of the Evangelical Baptist Church of Georgia. At present, he is committed to the development of the Ph.D. research project, Iconology of Sacred, the shifted political value of religious-themed secular art in the late Soviet and post-Soviet realms. His research scope also extends to queer art, and he is a member of AICA Armenia. So please join me in welcoming Nikoloz.
Thank you, Sopo. I will start with my presentation directly. Do you see it? Yes, it should be PowerPoint.
Yes.
Okay, I'll try to be fast so that there is a time for eventually Giorgi to finish his presentation for Irena. So yeah, I'll start. Last 3 years, I've been researching the role of Christian imagery in contemporary art of late socialist and post-Soviet times. And I support the idea that the artists in 1970s and 1980s referred to Christian iconography to oppose the authoritarian regime. I argue that within their creations, they somehow enacted the Christian values and they tried to achieve a spiritualizing effect as such. But this scenario is slightly different when we talk about post-Soviets. It seems they incorporate religious motives in a more technical terms. Their artworks are not about belief or faith anymore, but there we witness just the return of religion as such. And the addressee here is not the authoritarian state anymore, but pseudo-patriotic, nationalistic, patriarchal trends in general, and the institutions which back these trends, such as the Orthodox Church herself, which played a central role in solidifying nationalism also in Georgia. However, hypotheses in art history are always challenging, and usually we art historians are forced to develop alternative narratives and theories considering the exemptions. The deviant artists such as Sergei Parajanov and Otar Chartishvili forced me to develop this very alternative narrative. What they did was not a simple opposition towards the authoritarian regime. I argue that what they did also responded to the challenges on societal level which became very active after their death, such as the devaluation of Christian values, disrespect of human rights, especially the rights of women and different minority groups in the name of God, and the series of inter-Caucasian conflicts, and so on. Before moving on to Parajanov's and Chartishvili's works, I would like to provide a brief contextual overview about the relationship of the religious, political, and social dimensions within the last decades of Georgia, but also share with you a couple of religious-themed artworks by other nonconformist artists. This will help me to illustrate and position the rationale of the artistic research subjects of Chartishvili and Parajanov in return, and explain why I consider them as Soviet contemporaries, the term I used as title of my paper. The most influential wave of developing secular Christian art in Georgia was at the end of 1970s and throughout 1980s. For example, in 79, Irakli Pargiani completed 2 gospel books by creating illustrations and text, and he used Mhedruli, the third and current Georgian script. The act of creating gospel books can be considered as an attempt to republicize Christian cosmology with the support of innovative visual systems and current alphabet. First, Pargiani worked on the Gospel of Mark, followed by the Gospel of John in the same year. The characters of Pargiani's religious illustrations in both gospel editions, as well as in the later artworks, echo the visual representation systems from the Middle Ages of Eastern Christendom. The timelessness is comprehended by arbitrary distribution of the figures and objects in the space. The corpus of the protagonist is disregarded by being covered with massive cloth, and the eyelids and the gaze of the protagonist represent the most vivid component of the composition, being the only source of communication. One important aspect of Pargiani's palette extends to the conceptual paradigm of gospel mood theories as well. It is widely concluded that Gospel of John is focused on the universal and divine nature of Jesus Christ compared to other three Gospels. Pargiani's Gospel of John largely comprises of blue, pale, and green colors and their mixtures. This results in creating the serenity of a sky palette. In contrast, the palette in Pargiani's Gospel of Mark unites mostly warm, earthly colors such as coral, brown, beige, terracotta red, crimson, etc. Thus, Pargiani's Gospel series represent one of the first examples of secular Christian art of the late Soviet times, where the issue of consonance of content and visual representation was resolved. The medium, book, the use of modern language, text, and the partial reliance on the existing Christian visual representation system show that the artist aimed to sustain conceptual relations with the past and promote Christian values in the present. During the Soviet period, the Georgian Orthodox Church was subjected to discrimination, especially in the 1920s and 30s. The Soviet Union proclaimed the church as a platform for counter-revolutionary forces. Later, this relationship was calmed a bit. However, the church wasn't able to construct sound relations with the state until the Union fell. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the citizens of Georgia and presumably the citizens of other Soviet countries as well had a harsh return to their cultural origins. In this regard, the Doctor of Philosophical Sciences, Alexander Agajanian, characterizes this return as being very aggressive and intense. According to the professor of the Eastern European Studies, Sabine Rame, due to the fact that the church was repressed in the communist times, it still, she means the post-Soviet times, it still maintained the habit of being in a constant fear and survival. As a consequence, in the 1990s, the Georgian Orthodox Church started to promote religious version of nationalism, merging the concept of being Georgian and being Orthodox Christian. Simultaneously, the Georgian Orthodox Church started to serve anti-Western ideology, and as a result was in consonance with the government of Georgia, for which Russia represented the only terms of reference on the international political scene, and it is the same today. From 1990s onwards, the intense process of religious deprivatization began. Religion ceased limiting itself to the realm of personal space and extended to the public sphere. Sociologist Jose Casanova sees this process of deprivatization as a response to secularization and globalization. This trend highlighted the national paradox. Though the newly independent countries strive to develop European democratic system encompassing the values of diverse and multiculturalism, the Christian Orthodox Church was still regarded as the main guarantee to maintaining Georgian identity. The Soviet scientific atheism and post-Soviet Orthodox Christianity operate in the same dimension. In the Soviet period, the Soviet scientific atheism, also known as Marxism-Leninism, had a monopoly, later substituted by the Orthodox spirit and political nationalism. Therefore, contemporary Georgian Orthodox Church was not evolved as a result of competing with other religious institutions. The church came into power as a direct successor to the Soviet atheism, inheriting the monopoly that came with it. And since it benefited from political rights, the church started to intervene in wider socio-political contexts. And aimed at protecting Georgian citizens, the church decided to oppose globalization, liberal values, and the human rights of minority groups. Therefore, a multitude of churchgoers, the parish, were not only subjected to spiritual services, but also political and social propaganda. There have been multiple actions and processes by the Georgian Orthodox Church aimed at maintaining this very Georgian identity, or whatever it is. I will name just one. On May 17, 2017, a small number of LGBT activists and their supporters planned to observe the International Day Against homophobia, transphobia, and biphobia on the main avenue of Tbilisi. What happened afterwards will always stay as a black mark within the history of contemporary Georgia. Up to 20,000 people, including the Orthodox clergy, acted violently. They broke through the symbolic corridor of the police and attacked the activists. Fortunately, all activists managed to escape. However, the ones which were in the minibus were encircled by the extremists. After this rage, the Patriarchate of Georgia reclaimed 17 May, and the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia became the national holiday dedicated to the concept of Holy Family. Yeah, now you see this cross. And during that day, actually not during the day, but we compromised and decided to observe Pride March only after 8 years from that day, the footage which you already saw, on a different date, so July 5th. However, at that day, the extremist groups, in this case openly pro-Russian forces, occupied the main avenue again, resulting in the death of one cameraman and the enactment of the cross in front of the Parliament of Georgia. This is how the church tries to create the image of the enemy by gays, lesbians, bisexuals, and transgender people, and they need us to maintain the stimulus of the Orthodox extremists and their power after all. The Soviet regime arrested Sergei Parajanov 2 times, first in 1948 for 3 months and then in 1973 for 4 years on charges of sodomy and distribution of pornography. However, the main reason for this arrest was the fact that he was an anti-Soviet person, a very dangerous mind for the regime, and was also very cross-regional, sort of cosmopolitan at that time, a very dangerous mind for the nationalistic agenda to be unapologetically unleashed after the collapse of the Union. Considering this nationalistic and pseudo-patriotic trend, which is even very active now in Georgia, very often the sexual orientation of the artists of Soviet era is not being discussed, as if it is still something for the nation to be ashamed of. Some advocate the idea that sexual orientation should not be considered while discussing creative legacy of an artist. I do not support this methodological point of view, not just because that I'm a gay myself, but because I know that the power and the role of sexual identities in creative processes is very important. And when we talk about Parajanov, it is even methodologically unethical to skip his sexuality. He himself considered his sexuality as one of the defining factors for his creativity. Once he said to Tarkovsky, "Andrei, you are a talented director for sure, but you are not a genius because you are not a homosexual and you have never been arrested." Leah Feldman, associated professor at the University of Chicago, positions Parajanov, both his work and his lifestyle he pursued outside the space and time, confronting Soviet nationalist patriarchal hegemony. Parajanov's films also reject visions of heterosexual cisgender Soviet male as the of the revolutionary spirit, she says. Moreover, Feldman discusses one concrete scene from Eshi Kerib, film directed in 1988 by Parajanov and Abashidze, where she further highlights Parajanov's artistic research subject. In the scene in which Ashik visits the Shah, he exposes his own disguise, breaking the sense of cinematic verisimilitude and connecting his gesture of his performance of masculinity. He sneaks into the palace, whispering to the guards in undubbed Azeri as he crosses the threshold. "Unfortunately, I don't have a mustache," he says, and he traces one across his upper lip with his finger. Utterance and gesture here together reference the connection between a bird or mustache and masculinity, respect and age, thus underscoring Ashik's youth and sense of invisibility. Parajanov then captures the character's self-disguise as he removes a guard's bird and applies it to his face, highlighting the artificiality of the costuming and his own visibility with this acquisition of a marker of mature masculinity. To research Parajanov's art is a superb endeavor for an art historian, considering his incorporation of different iconographies. And as it becomes evident, one of the iconological explanations of what he does is to tackle the issue of masculinity, what we call toxic masculinity today, and hegemony of patriarchal power. Along with the Last Supper scenes, yeah, here I have just videos. Last Supper scenes and symbol of fish and many other motifs, he regularly revives biblical scenes without enacting some sort of dogmatic narrative. It seems he's playing with them. However, sometimes we meet very provocative scenes and sequences within the films, and strangely to me, some of them have not been analyzed in depth yet. For example, in AICA, he provides the images of mosques, emphasizing the forms of minarets. I will not share my opinion what these images might reflect from the perspective of formal analysis, but I will share with you the possible iconological interpretation. All Abrahamic religions are fundamentally patriarchal, masculine, and phallocentric. Okay, I will move slowly. Before I move to another underestimated scene from AICA, I would like to share with you the concept of a genderless God. Toma Lipartiani, the spiritual leader of Anglican Church in Georgia, in his letter, The Reformation of Inclusive Language in the Church, argues that the humankind assigned male gender to the God again because of the patriarchal hegemony on earth. And that nowadays some denominations consider neutralizing the term which describes the God as a man, as a father, as he. Before connotating the ideological concept of Paragenov's work, I would like to remind you of one passage from the New Testament by Matthew. And about the 9th hours, Jesus cried with a loud voice saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And now what we have in one of the iconic scenes of AICA, the main protagonist says, Mother, where are you? Why have you abandoned me? And I argue that this textual resemblance is not a simple coincidence. It is a purposely edited citation from the New Testament. Paragenov questions the gender of the universal mind, the God, and assigns him female gender. On the other hand, we can think in a very psychosexual terms. The research on social exclusion in Georgia held in 2020, so 2 years ago, showed that there is a big difference revealing sexual orientation to a mother and a father. The data showed that 68% of the respondents came out to their mothers, while only up to 30% have discussed their sexual orientation with their fathers. I do not know what would be the results of the same survey if it was carried out 50 years ago. However, I argue that the AICA could be seen as the personification of collective drama of queer people who have been forsaken and abandoned by sort of motherland. In 1980s, when nationalistic agenda started to gain power, Paragenov became subjected to another type of discrimination on the national grounds, as he was ethnically Armenian. Some position him as stranger from the ethnic point of view, and ironically, he was not given the permission to make a film about Queen Shushennik of Georgia, canonized by the Orthodox Church as a saint, who was actually ethnically Armenian as well. However, all the films he made encompass the aesthetics of different countries of the South Caucasus. Sometimes they encompass Ukrainian Kazakh traditional patterns as well. This eclecticism might also imply to his wish to transcend conventional national borders, which became even more harsh and destructive after the failure of the Soviet internationalism. In this regard, Leah Feldman mentions Nagorno-Karabakh region as well, and adds, in this sense, Paragenov's work speaks to the contemporary moment in which few political imaginaries pose alternatives to the series of nationalistic and neo-fascist movements that have emerged with the fall of the Soviet Union and the collapse of the Cold War geopolitics. And at last, I would like to make an emphasis on, in my opinion, one of the most important aspects of Paragenov's work. It is the strive towards beauty. Film critic Popiashvili explains Paragenov's devotion to the idea of beauty, considering his syncretic approach in the arts, where different artistic directions, choreography, visual arts, music, folk tales, etc., are intertwined and equal, and they all together serve to create something very beautiful. I guess my time is already limited, but I need a couple of minutes to deal with author Chartishvili's artistic legacy as well, at least from the perspective of my research. In his autobiography, he says, "My work, first of all, was a weapon to fight totalitarianism and atheism. I did it with big love because it was my job and no one else could do it on behalf of me." So we see that for Chartishvili, the enemy is dual, the regime and the hegemony of Marxism-Leninism. Now, I would like to share with you the couple of religious-themed images from Chartishvili's portfolio in order to discuss his interdependence with religious dimension from different perspectives. In 1983, he creates Last Supper, a mixed media piece. The first thing one pays attention are the gas masks covering the face of Jesus and his apostles. What could be the iconological explanation of this work? Well, we see it clearly that Chartishvili refers to Christian motifs in a very different way from Pargiani, for example, that I showed you in the beginning of my presentation. In Irakli Pargiani's art, as we saw, the artist tried to achieve spiritualizing effect. Could we say the same about Chartishvili's Last Supper? I would not. For me, it is a very rational work, in fact, and possible explanations could be found by digging the artist's personal archives and comparatively analyzing the societal events which took place at that time. One thing we can say for sure is that for Chartishvili, who lived in Rustavi, heavy industrialization acted as the symbol of the regime he was fighting against. And gas masks usually protect you from the dust and all the pollution these industries produced. Maybe for Chartishvili, this very hegemony of scientific atheism expressed in industrialization acted as one of the hindering factors for spiritual development, as a result of which not only we became deprived to see the God, but also vice versa. The main protagonist, Jesus, is unable to see us as he is wearing a fundamental iron mask. Chartishvili has a lot of artworks which directly forefront the challenge of religion in Soviet times. For example, in his works, Georgia, and then here we have this Lenin, volume 3. He portrays churches in a deformed way. However, I would like to point to one detail in here. In this very artwork, you see an arrow coming from the text saying Vladimir Lenin selected works to schematize white cross. For sure, I cannot insist on anything, but first thing what came into my mind is that Chartishvili juxtaposed these two as a symbol of substitution of Marxism-Leninism by Christian Orthodoxy in post-Soviet realm. I also became curious in one of his protagonists from 1970s. In 1973, he produces Woman with Blue Cloak, and I see it vividly that he uses this very same motif in another artwork labeled as Artist and Model, produced in the same year. When I first saw this graphic, I was somehow very familiar. It was somehow very familiar to me, as it reminded me of one of the most popular scenes throughout the history of Christian art, the scene of Annunciation, whereby Gabriel says to Mary that she is blessed among the women, etc., etc. And here again, does this potential citation from the New Testament somehow trigger spiritual stimulus? For me, it does not. The lines which go from the eyes of the painter or Gabriel towards Mary or the model and back refer to something very rational, something very schematic in Chartishvili's case. In 2019, I first met Jane Sharp in Tbilisi, and she shared with me some images from Zimmerli collection. When I saw one of the assemblages of Chartishvili titled SOS 1973, produced in 1973, I was very happy to see a clear iconographical resemblance between the image and the iconography of Madonna and the Child. Now I see that this image represents one of the exponents in the frames of the second thematic section of this exhibition. Do you think that the artist with deep religious feelings and ecclesiastic passion would use either gas masks during Last Supper scene or telephone to produce Madonna and child's iconography to oppose the regime and contribute to the development of theistic, in our case, Christian ethics? I do not. In his letter about Chartishvili, art historian Nana Shervashidze talks about the use of telephone as an artistic motive by Chartishvili, relating it to the fact that listening, usually unofficial, illegal listening, was very common practice in Soviet Union, the ultimate tool to control the people. Well, maybe intentionally or unintentionally, within this piece, Chartishvili creates the metaphor of the very fact how the God who sees and hears everything was substituted by the regime who sees and hears everything as well. And as I said, I position Chartishvili as well as Parajanov in post-Soviet paradigm, as in my opinion, the artistic legacies they have created respond to the actual period as well. 2 years ago, or it was like 2021, over 25 gigabytes of files and 3,000 pages of chat log leaked from the State Secretary Service of Georgia and revealed that it is very easy to tap a phone. We listen to everyone. We collect information about you. We collect collect compromising information. We seed rumors about you. We discredit you. We rule you through evil, wrote the elect whistleblower, former state security service agent, who is reportedly to have committed suicide in July 2021. He added that this was done in order to maintain Mr. Ivanishvili, former ruler of Georgia, and his Georgian Dream Party in power. So if we see this artwork again, does not this work somehow illustrate both periods? One whereby the Soviet regime substituted religion and gained controlling power, and the second whereby in post-Soviet times the church, aligned with the government of Georgia, inherited the monopolistic power of the regime and started to use the same controlling mechanisms. The irony is that the leaked files also included the information about the Orthodox clergy as well. I would like to finish my talk with this image. In 1973, Chartishvili creates the work which is titled World of Pearls. Here again, the faces of Madonna and the baby Jesus are substituted by the child's shoes. To detect the reference is very easy, as there is the very icon of Madonna with Jesus in the corner of the assemblage. One could say that this work revives the sentiments of simplicity, which is a very popular concept in Christianity. And by doing so, by doing this, we can think of Chartishvili as if he also created the work with a spiritualizing effect, as it seems to be the case of Pargiani. However, in my opinion, he simply plays a game. While talking about Chartishvili's Sots art, Nana Shervashidze says that he engages in this ritual of performance of game. The reconciliation of this irreconcilable is one of the main artistic methods determining the aesthetics of the works of Chartishvili. And here comes my hypothesis. Strongly influenced by Russian artistic collectives, Chartishvili was into games. For him, there was nothing to be tabooed, untouched. Even though he calls himself the fighter against atheism in his autobiography, I do not consider him as a particularly religious or atheist person based on what he did. Well, it is hard for me to prove anything, especially when we have his very own statement. However, he wrote his own statement, like, I mean, when he said that he's fighting against atheism. However, he wrote the last part of the autobiography very many years after he produced so-called nonconformist art. Maybe in the later times, he softened his Protestantism or nonconformist, I don't know. In this regard, I would like to bring another quote by Nana Shervashidze again. His life, she means Chartishvili, his life was struggle, his visual representation of his views and the desire to establish his own self, although at the end it turned out that he was as misunderstood as ever, alone and alien. The declared protest ended by silent speculations, absorption in his mind, and quest of spirituality. To conclude, I tried in this paper to highlight some of the important facts of contemporary times, which are reflected within the artworks of Sergei Parajanov and Otar Chartishvili, whose artistic research subject seems to transcend yet existing Soviet boundaries and rejoice post-Soviet realm. This is why I call them Soviet contemporaries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nikoloz.
Sorry if I took.
Thank you very much. Now I think
I don't hear
Giorgi,
your voice.
can you hear me?
Yes, maybe I should stop sharing video and share presentation instead.
Yeah, you can do that.
Let's try.
Or maybe I should do that because now you're
hear
frozen.
You
again.
should, yeah. Sopio, I
Yeah.
think you should show the screen because it seems his connection's unstable.
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Then I will ask you to share, please.
Mhm. Like here, we can continue where you left. So
Yes. I don't see the presentation yet. Do you?
Yes.
Oh my God.
I think you can start and yeah, we all can see your presentation.
So what can we do?
I think you can start, like, continue where you left.
I just wanted to follow. Let me follow my presentation at the same time. So please turn on the flex, the third slide.
Like Richard Hamilton.
Yeah, let it be Hamilton.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. So this is just to show the real pop art from the United States, the UK, and I'm not going to make any other comparisons. I wanted to quote the name of this pop art artwork. Just what is that makes today's home so different, so appealing? And this is that we all know that pop art was taking its origin from the industrialized world and massive production in millions. As Ketevan has mentioned, there was nothing to sell in the Soviet Union, so pop art as a mean of commercial wasn't needed, and the language of pop art could not be developed there. At the same time, could you turn to the next one, Sopo?
Sure.
Thank you. I would like to share two quotes from Klaus Oldenburg that you all read now. Pop art is a bold, raw, sharp, sweet, and stupid as life itself. I'm sorry, it's my translation from Georgian. I couldn't find English original anymore. And there is Avto Varazi's quote: if anything makes us feel sentimental in an artwork, this is our childhood. And please turn to the next one, Sopo. What you see now is an earlier collage by Avto Varazi called Arts, and it's created in 1955, a year before the real pop art that I've shown. And it is considered that so-called pop art starts with this in the Soviet sphere, in Soviet Georgia. Here we see unusual, let's say, body or an object as a play card in the center of the image. And it is very brave by those times because Stalin is dead only for 2 years. And there is a big gap of free creativity. And the only representative of Georgian art by then is David Kakabadze, who has ever created collages. And here we have the expert on Kakabadze's art, Ketevan, here. She can speak more about his meaning. But I would say briefly that David was an artist and a scientist who applied to optical so-called compositions, and this was the only way to survive, to call them compositions. And he was not showing these artworks to anyone. So these were hidden until around late 70s or 80s. What is important for the generation of Avto Varazi, and as you are guessing, I'm concentrating on Varazi's art, they were painters and collage makers at the same time. And this applies to Albert Dilbarian as well, and some others. It is important to quote Avto Varazi once again, who says, "Still life is a portrait of a mankind in which he or she is not represented but felt."
Did you lose him again? Oh, so many technical difficulties.
Did you experience some difficulties in my case as well?
No.
Okay.
I guess we should move on because we're running out of time.
Yeah, did Giorgi just disappeared, right?
Yeah, he just disappeared.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to move on, and maybe we can draw him in later conversation.
Okay, I'll introduce our final speaker today. It's Irena Popiashvili. She's a dean and founder of Visual Arts, Architecture and Design School at the Free University of Tbilisi. She's the founder of contemporary art space Kunsthalle Tbilisi. From 2013 to 2017, she co-curated Popiashvili window project, public art space in the vitrine, and from 2005 to 2012, Newman Popiashvili Gallery in New York. She has also served as a director of the State Academy of Arts in Tbilisi. In 2012, she has curated numerous exhibitions, such as Georgian Pavilion in Venice Biennale in 1999, Sergei Parajanov off-camera collages, assemblages, objects at Zimmerli Art Museum in 2003, Reframing the 80s in the Georgian National Gallery in 2012, and Know Thy Neighbor, Oxygen 2020, Propaganda Network in Tbilisi, Georgia. She received degrees from the Tbilisi State University, University of Lodz, Poland, and University of Georgia in Athens in the state of Georgia. So please welcome Irena. You can share your, oh, it's shared, so thank you.
Hi everybody, and thank you all the participants for their interesting presentations. I'm going to talk briefly about the exhibition history of Parajanov and Ketevan and their legacy in terms of their interaction and their influence in Georgian contemporary art. So to start with Parajanov, wanted to tell you that as a kid, I saw him on the streets of Tbilisi, and I was extremely impressed by his appearance and by his behavior. I've never seen anyone like that before. And for a strange reason, then for a long time, I found an image of him. It was Yuri Mechitov's famous photo of Parajanov flying down the street, and I had it up on my wall as a teenager. Later, I was thinking about it, what was it, usually when my peers, and of course I had, Paul McCartney and John Lennon's photos next to it, but it was strange that, I would perceive him as some kind of a rock star, even before seeing his films. And then later, obviously, when I saw his Color of Pomegranates, I became such a convert of his art. Just to show you a few images, this is a typical, what the cover or like of that period of the 70s movie stars looked like on the cover of the Soviet film magazines. And there was nothing personal about them. It was kind of more or less, uniform appearance that they had. And, obviously it was something that, sort of also set Parajanov apart from everyone else. So much later, when I was studying at Emory, I was friends with James Stephan, who was writing then a Ph.D. on Parajanov. So I was more and also when I was saying that I was from Georgia, most of the people I was interacting with in art school, if they knew of Georgia, they obviously, all of them knew of Parajanov. So later on, when I moved to New York and I started working as a gallery director for Joyce Goldstein Gallery, it was a gallery located in Soho, and she took an interest in my background. And so one of the first shows of Georgian artists that I did, it was a photo exhibition of Guram Zimmerli. Zimmerli is basically an artist who started art, who defined photography as an art form in Georgia. Also he was very important in terms of documenting Georgian art scene in the 80s and the 90s. Papashvili, for example, these are like several, following photos are taken by Papashvili. So this show that I did of him, of his work, it was Alice in Wonderland. It was also documenting Tbilisi of the late 80s and early 90s. Got a lot of attention. It was a show. It was actually the first show reviewed by Art Forum of a Georgian artist. And so it kind of made the gallery owner more interested in the projects that I was proposing. So following of that, I did 2 more exhibitions of Georgian artists other than the gallery, the artists that the gallery was representing. So it was Parajanov and Carlo Pacharava. So I just wanted to tell you briefly about how I went, because his appearance, had such an impact on me. And I thought that, his personality was very important to highlight in the exhibition. I got in touch with Yuri Mechitov and asked him for the photo series of Parajanov that he has done. And he was very much interested in doing so. And the big part of the exhibition were these portraits of Parajanov by Mechitov. At that time, my neighbor was Mark Polyakov, who is a Georgian artist who immigrated in early 80s to New York. Polyakov and Mechitov were in the circle of Parajanov, were friends with him. And through Mark, I also met Valery Boyarchan, a Tbilisi Armenian artist who was also living at that time in New York. And Mark both Mark and Yuri were telling me a lot of stories about Parajanov. And they mentioned how many times when they were at his place or when he would come over, he was constantly making something. He was either drawing or he was using beads or whatever was around to make some collages. So Boyarchan had a number of works, and that he said that were collaborative works between him and Parajanov. At the same time, this is in the 90s, 97, 98, it's Giorgi Aleximeshvili and Maga Mikadze. This couple are living in New York. He was teaching at the time at the Dartmouth College, and he was a set designer, an artist, costume designer, worked with Parajanov on on his last film, Ashik Karib. Obviously, they also had some of his works. Parajanov admired Maga. He liked, and Maga had several hats that Parajanov specifically made for her. So the works in the exhibition, and there was a third family that was involved for me in terms of gathering the materials. It was a family of Gendrik Hegidian, who was a famous Armenian art historian, curator, and he was basically a founder of the first contemporary art museum in Soviet Union in Yerevan. So through Gendrik Hegidian's relatives, actually Parajanov, when he came to New York, stayed with the family, and they had a number of works. So the collages in the exhibition, and also there was a poster for Rashid Karib that came from Meskhishvili were part of the exhibition. So one day, as there were quite a bit of people, number of people coming to see the exhibition, the gallery was located in New York next to Drawing Center, so it was quite centrally located at the time. And there walked in an elderly gentleman who was interested in the exhibition, and me as a younger and eager curator, I was very happy to give him the tour of the show. And he turned out that it was Norton Dodge, and he was very taken by the show. And this is at the end of 97, beginning of 98, when I did the show. And then he acquired these works from the gallery. And then later, it was already the show that I curated at the Zimmerli was in 2002 of Sergei Parajanov off-camera collages, assemblages, and objects. However, when I did the show, I have to say that he has continued collecting Parajanov's work. So a lot of works that were in the collection at the time when I came to Zimmerli were not the ones that I knew of, and was, him, I guess, sourcing and finding more works by him. One of the things was also in the show that I did at Zimmerli was the shirt. And this is the shirt that is in Parajanov Museum in Yerevan, but there is a similar shirt that apparently he made for Allen Ginsberg when he was in New York, and this is also in the collection, and it was also part of the exhibition that I did at the Zimmerli. Actually, I was saying to Sopo that I haven't researched or looked online that much, but I saw that on many images that were in the exhibition, certain people have, or Vartanov specifically has written that these works are fake or put a fake mark on them. And I'd be very curious of knowing, like, what are his arguments, because more I looked, there's a very big similarity between the works that are, for example, presented at the museum of Parajanov, and they look quite similar to me. But I guess it needs more research and more argumentative, proof of why these ones are fakes as opposed to the ones that are in the museum. These are images from Guram Tibashvili, because I found this interesting, because these are photos taken apparently a year after Parajanov died, and these are his friends who came, and apparently his apartment was untouched still, and these are his friends sort of using the costumes and clothing that he had in his apartment before these works were, and the belongings were moved to Yerevan, and his museum was created there. One other thing that I wanted to talk about is about, and Nika mentioned in his presentation, in his great presentation, I really liked it actually, that Parajanov in a way created, is considered to be an ancestor and predecessor for many queer artists in Georgia. Especially with creating a certain language, visual language, and which is Trans-Caucasian, and it's not referencing, like, let's say, the Western queer language, visual language, but it's specifically something that's specific to Caucasus and the countries in Caucasus. So to demonstrate, or sort of to show you some of it, it's Uta Bekaya's piece. It's basically the performances and the animated tableaus that he creates. And this was done in Tsinandali state in Georgia, and it was called Lover's Ritual. And this is kind of a tribute to Parajanov. And Uta's work, he sort of continuously uses sort of references, his visual language, and of course, adding his own. He's a very interesting artist. He's based between Tbilisi and New York, and currently his work is up at the Kimball Arts Center, I think, until the end of November. And this is, for example, Uta's costumes for Beri Gaoba, which is like a celebration similar to Halloween that was done usually during in the fall. And he did the whole procession together with the movement theater that went walked through this procession. It was very joyful and celebratory, and these people dressed up walked through one of the main streets of Tbilisi up until the old Tbilisi square called Rita. So I wanted to switch to Keti Kapanadze and briefly speak about her, and I was thinking that there is an interesting connection between Parajanov and Keti Kapanadze, and it's Otario Seliani, because I remember I met Otario Seliani in the late 90s in New York when he was there doing a workshop at NYU, and then he was part of the New York Arts Festival. And when he learned that I was doing this, working on this exhibition of Parajanov, he told me, "Oh, I have this terrible story about it," because apparently there was quite a scandalous fight that Parajanov and Seliani had at the Rotterdam Film Festival, and it was literally a fist fight. And then they didn't speak for a long time afterwards. And then Seliani told me one day, Giorgi Shengelai came to me and said, "You know, he's gravely ill, Parajanov, and I think it's time for you to come and see him." And when he went to visit him in a hospital, Seliani told me that Parajanov, the moment he saw him in the doorway of his hospital room, he said, "I must be really dying." But apparently it was still kind of humorous. He told me it's a humorous story because they did reconcile and did speak to each other. And Keti Kapanadze was in the leading role of Otario Seliani's film, Brigands, Chapter 7, that she did in 1996. She's also, I was speaking to her recently, and I told her that she's, to me, if I had to describe her to somebody who is not from Georgia, I would say that she's like Patti Smith of Georgian culture of that period, because of her kind of like underground cultural presence, and also simply being the only woman in the late 80s who was making work and exhibiting together with the avant-garde artists of new avant-garde of Georgian art at the time, even though she was never part of the 10th floor group or then later Marjanishvili studio. She specifically says that she was not part of it because she never really liked to paint, and those artists, those group of male artists, they were all making large paintings. It's also interesting, this is her in 1991 outside of this gallery called White Gallery, together with Niko Tsetskhladze, Nino Chubinashvili, Oleg Timchenko, and Khatija Paridze. And I wanted to show you, these are photographs by Guram Papashvili. As I said, mentioned to you, he was kind of a documentarian, an archivist of that period. And later on, when I did an exhibition of reframing the 80s in 2012, when I returned back to Georgia, the big part of the exhibition was this documentary photos from Guram Papashvili, because I really felt that sort of for the viewers, for the public to see and feel the zeitgeist of the period, it was really important to see how these artists lived and what was daily life like. And these are the pieces, the black and white pieces of Keti Kapanadze from 1980s, either from 83 and 84, because in 1997 I came to Tbilisi, I did a studio visit with her, and actually, before 97 actually, I collected a few of her works from her and took them with me, and these were this black and white series. I think these black and white series are quite interesting from 2 points, because when she describes them, she says that she didn't even think that they were mechanical drawings. Basically, that's what she was making, because she was not thinking what she was making, and she was just copying some kind of manuals or some technical instructions. And these are really random objects that she would put together. However, you know, like thinking of it, it made me think that, you know, like also about the artwork of that was surrounding and what was, you know, made in official Georgia, which was like sort of all kind of heavy and rich with symbols and ideology. And suddenly here she is making a totally absurd, like no meaning. She claims that there's no, you know, she was not thinking what she was drawing. She was just making these drawings. And also that these were the works that she was first making the drawings and then, you know, transferring them to canvas. And these works were included in the exhibition of Giorgi, that infamous exhibition at the artist's house that was basically censored, but like also like unofficially censored, because they just turned the lights off at the artist's house, so no one really could see the exhibition. And some of the drawings in that show and the documentation of the show are the photos of Keti Kapanadze. By the way, they were married at the time, and they were also included in that. What I would make one connection between this work and her current pieces that she's making, because this one I made a mistake, because in the catalog it said defamation of gender, and I thought that it was just a mistake. But when later I spoke to her, she said no, it was defamation, because it's a made-up word that she made up as a title, and it really didn't mean anything. If you would pay attention, also the texts that are always in English in this black and white series, which she calls Metaphysical Time, are also like they do not make sense. And where, for example, this plain paint, you know, she would say that she saw them and then she repeated them over and over. But there's one interesting connection, because there's a series of photographs that she made when she drew on the forehead of her cousin the two planes clashing, and then the sort of the portrait of death on her forehead, and then she photographed her, and they are very much similar to Rodchenko's photos of Lyubov Popova. This is the first exhibition, and I misspelled AICA, but anyway, this is the exhibition organized at AICA at the Expo Georgia, and Keti told me that this is the first exhibition that she was included in, and first exhibition she showed in Tbilisi together with the Georgian artists of Marjanishvili Theater and the 10th Floor Group. You see this like humongous paintings that they were making, and this is Expo Georgia is kind of the World Expo, a kind of a place in Tbilisi that was built in the 50s, and they had these really huge spaces, and mostly it was the first time when international curators and critics came, Western international curators and critics came to Tbilisi. And I remember that Kim Levin of Village Voice wrote up about, their studio visits to these contemporary artists at the time. And these are the photos of Guram Papashvili from the period. You see in the front row Keti Kapanadze again here. This is the lecture that Flats, German artist, one of the first ones who came to Georgia and spent almost like a year there, and he did lots of performances. And it's very Cajun lecture that he organized when he didn't speak a word. And there was this huge crowd of young art critics and art historians, who collect, who went there expecting some kind of like fabulous presentation by Flats, who just sat there quietly and didn't speak. And of course, he was also like visually was emulating Joseph Beuys, because he was, clean shaven and was wearing like leather jackets and all that. These are like 91, 92 portraits of Keti Kapanadze with her metal work. And it's interesting because she started, this is her daughter, now famous artist Anna K.E. With the works that Keti was making when she started embodying the works in metal. and you see that that she was making these installations, but pay attention to that because it's always in English, and it's basically, I would say that she's a forerunner, and she makes feminist work even without realizing or articulating or like theorizing about it, because that she's the only female artist working among and exhibiting among this group of male artists. Because later on, when I did an exhibition of artists of the 80s, her and Liashvili were the only two female artists that I could exhibit in this show, or find the artists who were working at the time together and exhibiting with this group. I wanted to talk briefly about these paintings that are also in the exhibition right now at Zimmerli. And I spoke to Keti about it. It passed by city of Ouagadougou. This is almost like, longing for travel. And she's 97 and she longs to leave the country and go somewhere far. And I paid attention that it's done on artificial leather. And in a weird way also, I would say that because of the still life, and because also that the image looks a little bit like something seen from the train window, and a mirage, which is also like, whether it's real or unreal. And the fact that she's making it on an artificial leather, there is definitely something Pirosmani-esque in these works. This one as well is this mirage-like landscape. I'm saying this mirage because later on it repeats in her work, in the series of work that are called Fata Morgana, and that were done in the West when she started living in Paris or in the West, that she would make these photo collages of like apparitions, and it's kind of reverberates with this work. This is the banner for the exhibition that I did at the Georgian National Museum, that Keti's work also was involved, and I was exhibited there. And this is her piece, painting, together with some of the documentary photos of the period. And I want to finish up with the works because she never really used the Georgian alphabet with the metal work. And this is the recent show, two-person show, Me and You and You and Me, where she exhibited with a young artist who is a graduate of VAD. She was my student. And this was an exhibition presented at the gallery called 4710. And I loved it because it's, even she switched to Georgian, but it's unreadable Georgian. I could not really make sense of it, but I still appreciate that she, after coming back to Georgia, or even she's teaching at VATS, that she did this text, and she was telling me I could give you the transcript of it. But I think that, once you, like, if it's, you would read this transcript or not, when you're seeing it, and it's in Georgian lettering, I'm kind of, I'm happy with it. I don't need to read it in a way like how I had to read, like, embodiment of, it's almost the embodiment of Georgian language. And one, last piece is this one that is up right now still. It's at the Writer's House. It's an exhibition that Monika Chekova from Czech Republic curated. But this is, she did a piece called The Mother Tongue, that was together shown in Germany in one of the museums. And this one is in Georgian, and it reads Dedaena, mother tongue. And I love the way she, in this case, like, started using Georgian lettering in her current work. But, and this is it shortly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irena. I think Giorgi, are you still here? Do you want to just summarize very quickly what you wanted to say? Because we are really running out of time, and I would like to leave some time for the Q&A as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm so sorry. Let's make the third attempt. So very briefly, and if you can show the images at the same time, I'll just make some quotations. Yeah, this one. So Altovarazi wrote, and as you all know, Georgians, that he was writing his very brief notes irregularly, and thanks to her spouse and thanks to her widow, this was survived, who has collected and edited in 2013. So these are sort of explanations to his own work. He writes, all pens give us a great opportunity, but when they cannot express our thoughts, anything can be used, any material, if it helps in the expression. Or, he writes also, instead of painting a printed fabric, I will rather glue into the surface. And this is what we see. Could you turn to the next one, Sopo? So, for this reason, these images are called Pop-Art, very simply. And this was the understanding of the society in those times, in early 60s and 70s. I would like to quote also Jane Sharp. She writes in her article, Beyond Orientalism, in the collection edited by Blakesley and Wright, that in terms both of lifestyle and work with found materials, no doubt Varazi consciously drew an analogy between himself and Pirosmani. Indeed, he was represented by contemporaries as Pirosmani's direct heir. And here she, as well as Kuznetsov, mean Avto playing the role of Pirosmani in the movie directed by Giorgi Shengelaya in 1969. It is interesting that these artworks are considered to be neither collages nor assemblages in the pure sense, but they are having the features of all of these. Anyways, they serve as some sort of symbols. Could you turn to the next one, Sopo? I think we have the next one. Pirosmani should be somewhere there. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not following. Yeah, and as an heir to Pirosmani, as many of Georgian artists were, he is applying to the same material world like bottles, fishes, but this is not the main reason. He is symbolizing items and objects of everyday life. And again, in comparison to American and British pop art, what is there and what is here? Here people, I mean artists, of course, are representing what is very familiar and even intimate to them. Very often we see unique pieces of furniture or jewelry in the works of Georgian artists, and Parajanov is one of those examples. So pop art is not relevant at all. And I think I can conclude with this thing by Varazi, that everything that is around us should get old. Nowadays, an item, an object is not getting old. It is being ruined and destroyed. Whenever oldness used to have its continuation, the rotten tree would fertilize the soil and another one would grow in its place. But today, asphalt, plastic, and silicate that are only poisoning the environment. And of course, Avto was not ecological artist. He didn't mean ecology in its pure sense. Rather, he meant maybe ecology of moral and morality and creativity. And we continue with his quote again. The material, for example, the trousers, please switch to the previous one, Sopo, where we have trousers. Yeah, let it be this one or the next one. The material, for example, the trouser, should not be destroyed, but keep its materiality and transform into a bull, horse, etc. But when the material loses its texture, what is the need of using this? In my understanding, it's quite funny that Nodar Janberidze, who was a party official and art historian from time to time, it was his changing role, wrote a book in 1989 called Quest and Tradition, and it has a brief essay spanning from 1920s to around 1980s. And we read there, when dealing with the works of Georgian avant-garde artists, one gets an impression that they're trying to catch up with what they had omitted from the well-known arsenal, he means visual vocabulary, of 20th century art. However, there are works that demonstrate attempts to assimilate, transform, and absorb this trend, taking local peculiarities into account. The influence of modernistic trends in Georgian art is observable, mostly since the 1960s, when already well-known artists Banzeladze, Hundadze create abstract pictures, while Abtovarazi, Otar Chkhartishvili, Amir Kakabadze have produced combined compositions based upon a Dadaistic mood. Is it funny because he calls it Dadaistic, but what he speaks about belatedness, he doesn't mention the word belatedness, but I think he means this term that is very widely coined nowadays. I wouldn't say that it is belated, and it is quite simultaneous to European art, to Western art in whole. But the most interesting thing is how these artists understand pop art in the terms and how they define this objecthood represented in their own painting. That makes it very different and unique, I would say, because if they would simply follow pop art in its pure essence, in its pure vocabulary, it would not be interesting at any point. And that's all. I'm so sorry for interrupting many times.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know, we should move to the Q&A, but we are really running out of time. So I wonder, Jane, if you would like to, like...
Sure. I don't know. I do have questions for all of you, and in a way, I'd really rather hear you ask questions of each other or comment on each other's principal arguments. But again, I don't know that we have time for all of that, although our time can continue, of course, on the Zoom. Yeah, so I guess I was going to return my first question. I was going to return to Keti's talk because singling out Banzeladze, in part because so many writers these days question even that proposition that you make, you know, that this abstraction at a certain point in time. And I wasn't sure whether you were extending that observation specifically to Banzeladze, but that there was this kind of, well, somewhat aggressive stance with regard to abstraction, that it should be, or that it even could be, apolitical. I think many scholars are questioning that notion, you know, really about art all over Eastern Europe, especially. And I'm thinking most recently of Clara Kemp Welsh's book, Anti-Politics, which describes and really analyzes how even this anti-political or apolitical statement is implicitly engaged with the current political environment, and therefore still expresses something that is, you know, loaded or socially, if not determined, consciously engaging, not subconsciously, but consciously engaging its environment. And I'm wondering how far, or what you would say about that in relation to Banzeladze now, because of course the notion of apolitical abstraction was itself part of the Cold War discourse. So I'm wondering what you think about that now, and perhaps in relation to the succeeding presentations, which really do situate the art produced at about the same time through a different lens.
I didn't understand exactly what do you mean. Maybe you mean that like abstract art, it does not symbolize something. We do not see some symbols or some objects which directly are against like political situation and so on. Do you mean this? And that why abstract art was so so in my mind, and as I remember all this, abstract art for that time, it was like a weapon which was directed against the political situation, against the government, because you know, I thought about it and I wanted to talk about it, and then I thought I took too much time. That what we have in the artwork, what are the main components? Form and the content. So here we don't have any content, but this form itself, this gesture that the artist is doing something what is not allowed, and what it meant something very special and dangerous for the official people. Like they always, abstract art was prohibited. Absolutely, during the Soviet period, it says much. So the artist, when the artist makes something which is, Banzeladze was absolutely honest in his work, but he did not show this work to anybody besides his close friends, like Iraklio Chiauri, the artist, knew about it, and very few people. So for him, it was like he was doing something what was against the situation, against the all. So I didn't understand exactly what did you mean, what you wanted to ask about, what...
I just wanted to probe that notion, because, you know, you could say that his work, in as much as it anticipates, you know, you could turn that in two directions, in as much as an abstract artist anticipates in the Soviet Union a negative reaction, or perhaps censorship, or something even worse. That they have a choice to, you know, be provocative in some way, so to exhibit, to exist in the public sphere, or to remove their work from the public sphere and have just these apartment exhibitions, or what studio exhibitions. But that too is a kind of acknowledgement of the situatedness of the abstract work. So it can't be viewed as, you know, empty of political reference or discourse. So I don't have an answer. I'm curious about to what extent that can be probed with Banzeladze or anybody else's work. So if any of you have thoughts about it, that would be interesting. Yeah, sorry, Irena.
Not long ago, I think actually even like 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a big show of Banzeladze in its foundation, Atinatis Cultural Center. And they brought, works, large abstract works of Banzeladze from Paris. And that was his works because he traveled and he made works, apparently large works with Françoise Friedrich Gallery. And they brought it in, and it was for the first time, you know, shown in Tbilisi. And I personally saw for the first time his large work, because I've seen like smaller pieces, but never the large ones. And then I was thinking, because himself, like even making this kind of work was an act of defiance, and it was a political act. And the fact that he had those followers in Iliko Zautashvili and Gia Zguradze, because I knew of his name just because of his name, because Shura was there, like, I don't know, like guru, and they, you know, he was a person absolutely admired by this artist. So in itself, I mean, thinking of the Soviet context, you know, he, you know, it was political what he was doing, to me and to my understanding. What do you think?
Yes, of course, it was so.
Yeah.
It was his, he was acting, so in this way he was I saw those works. I am not in Tbilisi for a long time period. I have not seen this show, but I remember those works until they left for France. And I have even photographed those works. I have them in my archive, and they were very impressive.
I think they were Paquita Escoffet's works.
Sorry?
Paquita.
No, yeah, Paquita. Some of them are from Paquita Escoffet Miro, but some were from Françoise Friedrich, and there was another person, as far as I know, from the foundation.
So maybe, yeah, Sofia, I think maybe if you all raise your hands, you see there's a little hand icon at the bottom if you wish to leap in and comment.
Yeah, I just also wanted to remind the audience that they can use the Q&A section and type their question. So I encourage them to do so. And if not, I don't know, maybe Julia has any questions, or I have a couple of questions, but since we're running out of time, I wanted to allow other people to.
I'll just comment, yeah, on Banzeladze, because I don't know his art. His like I'm not researching his art as such, but I have a very interesting image that I quickly Googled now, and I will share it with you because it now relates indeed with what I'm researching. It's religion, the power of church, etc. I just need to, yeah. Sorry, so for just a second.
So he painted the walls in the Dube church.
Exactly. And it is meant that, I don't know if you see, it's like the Patriarch of Georgia, and he's next to him. So basically it's like many interesting dimensions that we can think about this artist who was non-official, but it seems quite close to, well, to the church, which also was somehow discriminated by the regime, but you know, it's already the late years, so it's not some sort of harsh authoritarian regime anymore. Yeah, just some drop about, like, some thought about me when you discussed the Banzeladze.
You know, we don't have time just to talk about it because these are different periods in his life and work.
Yeah.
So that's why
it is intriguing that
more complicated, you know, we have to follow everything just to understand and to explain.
Yeah.
So this
it is intriguing that he would turn to that. You know, because I was thinking about the artist that I wrote about too, Goncharova, while being at her most rebellious, also accepted a church commission in 1913, you know, just while she was being censored for painting her religious images and showing them in galleries. She was commissioned to do frescoes. So there's this really fascinating paradox about, you know, lodged within this notion of provocation and accommodation somehow of the regime that you point to. Yeah, Sofia, maybe you should ask your question so that we can.
Sure. Maybe I'll ask to Nikoloz again, since he was talking about the current situation in Georgia and like making these parallels to the past. And so you mentioned that Parajanov and also Chubinashvili opposed the regime by doing the artworks they did. And then you also mentioned that nowadays Georgia still struggles to be a democratic state. So could you please comment on the current state of protest art in Georgia, and is like do you have any? Are there any contemporary artists of like kind of non-conformists right now? And if you can like talk about a bit about that, because I know that you are very interested in this and you mentioned a couple of times.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'll try to be short, like brief as possible. So well, as for the protest art, from my point of view in Georgia, you know, the situation is like this. When you do some sort of protest art, you need some money, at least to produce some stuff to show, yes, because you need some materials, etc. Audience and organizational expenses are also related to it. So it needs some money. So from what we have now in Georgia, it's like we don't have some sort of concrete foundation. We have a couple of businessmen who like invest in money, but the rest comes from the state as such. So since the funding is limited to develop some sort of conceptual, maybe protest art, of course, the amount of this kind of art is limited as well. But yes, we have, for example, there is a bullion group who do not do some sort of this commercial art, and so all they do is the protest. I was going to show you this also there, not artworks but performance, but we don't have time, so I won't take your time about this. But to respond to your question, like from my observation, we have some, but of course it's not enough, because I very often hear that, where are the artists? For example, we have the series of demonstrations every year against the government, who is like pro-Russian, and we are trying our best to somehow motivate artists to join us, and so that they express themselves. And they physically stand there in these demonstrations, but it's not really visible into their artworks. But on the other hand, you cannot tell to the artist like that he or she has to do some sort of politics-related artworks, because it's very intimate. But yeah, so in response to your question, yes, we have some, but in my opinion, it is not enough. It is not. It doesn't have the same, how to say, the same power as, I guess, the real dissident non-official artists used to have during Soviet times, or what was happening in 2011 or 12 in the main cathedral of Moscow, when Pussy Riot entered the church and they made the punk prayer. This kind of radical expression, artistic expressions, in Georgia we do not have. But maybe I'm a bit underestimating what's happening right now, and maybe someone else can also add something.
But don't you think that when Andro Dadiani and also Nkwantsa Jishkariani and Mariam Nadirashvili did a performance or in front of the Patriarch's residency, I mean, there were like, people doing things. And of course, Bullion is the one that's most radical, I would say.
You're right. Yeah, I was also thinking about Andrew Dadiani. I forgot to mention him. Yes, what he does, he is really, well, not provocative, but he fights with her own body. Yeah. And yes, I totally agree. Maybe there are also some others that don't come in my mind, but yeah.
Right, thank you.
Yeah. So I was also going to ask him, related to your presentation, Irena, on Keti and both Nikoloz and Giorgi, something about, because when I'd first thought about this exhibition, I had thought precisely that one area of inquiry would be this bizarre materiality, this kind of historical, what you refer to, Nikos, as trans-regional, the subversive character of both the eclecticism of the illusions, and Giorgi raises this too with Varazi's output, and then continuing on to your Irena, your presentation of Keti's kind of refusal to solicit meaning even from things that seem so determined, like the Pirosmani illusions. And I'm wondering whether you don't think that that's something that is coherent in some way in Georgian post-war art, that notion of the eclecticism that has fascinated me. Is it really, what do we make of that in the end? You each have different perspectives on it. And, but for someone who's really writing outside of this history, it is quite remarkable, and makes the objects very hard to approach as an outsider, I have to say. I just hope that you might reflect on that.
Well, may I, Nico? I will say a few words and then You can go on. Okay. Anyway, I think that, for example, especially I would talk on not only for about Keti, but about the younger generation of artists. And when we were talking about it yesterday, I mentioned it because a lot of times when people come and they see, like let's say even the youngest generation of Georgian artists and what they're doing, they kind of feel that there's no continuation. They are sort of always looking for, like, how does it connect with, let's say, something like or the generation before, or they try. They have hard time to contextualize it. I have my own theory of explaining it, and I'll tell you, I call this generation Zero, because there's no place.
Sorry, the people born when, around the 1990s, after the
or later. Late 95, later, more 2000s. And the reason I'm saying is because, or even with the generation of Keti, because where do younger people would see the work of Parajanov, Keti, or Avtovarazi or anything, we do not have a museum where you can go and say, okay, go and, you can look at this work. So these are your predecessors. This is what Georgians were doing from, because it was Pirosmani always, since 2010, at the National Gallery. The one floor is only Pirosmani, Kakabadze, Kikodze, which they also took away, and they're not there anymore. And so, yeah, I mean, that part is also used for temporary exhibitions, historical, but however, it's still temporary. So this is what I'm saying. It's like for them to find a point of reference, it's not here. It's not in the museum. So in a way, they have, I feel that this generation have the same distance to like their predecessors or the artists from the, like even the 80s or the 70s and so on. And so that for them, references come from Instagram or from, internet, wherever they direct. So thus, obviously, when you see their work, you cannot make connection with anything that was happening here before. Which especially like my colleagues, I was saying Yulia Sorokina, or like colleagues from Ukraine when they come in, because there's more of that continuity in the works of the contemporary art scene with their predecessors. They always comment, and where do these images come from? Why do they work like this? And my explanation is that they do not have a point of reference where I cannot send them and say, go to the museum and look at this work.
Yes, it was symptomatic that you had not seen Banzeladz's works before, those works. It was strange for me. Then I understood that, yes, you could not see it.
No.
But they were not
nowhere to be seen, exactly.
So you can't see all of this. Always people, artists, they need information, visual information.
No.
And theoretical as well, but visual information is very important, and this is a problem.
Giorgi or Nikoloz, this notion of the trans-regional, there's something with Nikoloz, something provocative in the notion that this trans-regional might be construed as excessive in a subversive way that supports the gender, the excessiveness of gender ambivalence or gender, that these two things work together is a fascinating idea in your case. I don't know how continuous you find it.
Yeah, like I mentioned those two terms, like it was post-regional, I guess, in regards to Parajanov, and also when I talked about his queerness. So yeah, in that case, in case of Parajanov, we vividly see how he uses this kind of different artistic motives, like they stem from these cudgel paintings, but also it's influenced by Azeri, Armenian and Georgian cultures. And of course, we have the eclecticism, and it's something that, like, for example, we can say that, it's a bit cliche that to say that like Georgia is some sort of the culture of the synthesis of East and West, and we always say that we have this good combination of eclecticism. In my personal opinion, actually, from the late 90s and beginning 20s, I always say that we have bad combination of eclecticism because of what's happening now in Georgia. So it's a bad combination of East and West. But as to generalize it, and still to, if you want my comments about this general context of Georgia. If we talk about contemporary artists again, and you know already mentioned this, I also don't somehow detect some sort of motives which bring me to some specific origins. I cannot say about, for example, about this young Georgian artist who is studying at the academy, but also for VATS, especially VATS, because in academy they still somehow follow this kind of traditional style or whatever it is. That, for example, I cannot say that he is Georgian or he is Armenian if he comes from Yerevan and studies here, because nowadays these artists really refer to what's happening on international level. And even though a lot of the artists incorporate some sort of Georgian alphabet as well and Georgian words in their works, even it does not make this work for me something very Georgian. For me, it's very international. So whenever they ask me like, what's happening now on the contemporary art scene in Georgia, my answer is first of all like this, that there is, I cannot qualify the artworks as something purely authentically Georgian. For me, they are the international, and the value is also international. And then I start to talk about the cultural policies, which is very specific in our country, so that culture is funded by the government still, the measure, etc., but it's different thing. I don't know if I responded to your question. Exactly,
no, this is all. Yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, and Giorgi, just briefly, I just wanted you to pursue if you're there. I don't.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Yeah. On this, Varazi's very really surprisingly for me programmatic statement about the diversity of illusions, and that I do think that it exceeds. I mean, for me, I teach Fluxus all the time and all of these, and pop art continuously, and there's something really more elusive about what Varazi is drawing from. So I take your thesis, and I wonder again, do you see that as a somehow driven by I don't know, an anticipation of political or some kind of scrutiny, ideological scrutiny, even though Varazi's not? I mean, he wasn't exhibiting those works, the reliefs, for example, the lamb's head, the pants. He wasn't exhibiting them, was he? Or was he trying to? Those I can't remember. And Sopio, you may have done research on that too.
During his life, he did not exhibit them. They were not exhibited, those works.
Actually, as far, sorry, you can answer.
Giorgi, yeah.
Yeah, Sopo, could you please share slide number 10 for a while? Because I had to skip that, and that's very important for answering Jane. So it's a very interesting question. Thank you, Jane, for that. As you already mentioned, and Kate proved that, he was not exhibiting almost at all, while two artworks by Varazi and Kintsurashvili of the same year, 1977, you see, and I would say it's a very interesting coincidence of, let's say, getting closer of two different artists coming from different, let's say, artistic quests. One from purely pictorial, that I consider Varazi, and Kintsurashvili, who was motivated, really motivated to create something non-conformist, to apply to object as such. Maybe I'm not expressing what I mean exactly, but these are two different artists getting close in this case, in this particular case, whereas they're different in their total creative work. And Varazi incorporates all the subjects in his pictorial, let's say, entirety, whenever Kintsurashvili is aiming at something different. At least this is my understanding.
Yes, Sopio, I was.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to say that as far as I know, Varaz didn't have any exhibitions in his life, right? And he had to have just one in early 70s, I guess. And it was like canceled at the day of the opening. So yeah, that's what I.
It was in 68
Okay.
when the Ministry of Police, MVD, has cancelled it.
Mhm. But don't you think Varazi is like such an interesting character? I mean, also not only for his work, but the fact that he played Pirosmani in that famous film of Giorgi Shengelaya. In a way, I feel that a lot of times his personality has been sort of projected on Pirosmani's personality. And then we sort of describe a lot of times, you know, speak of or think of Pirosmani in terms of Varazi.
Yes, but you know, in the late 1970s, after his death, when he passed away, the exhibition of Varazi's works was presented in the Merani, was such gallery at Rusavelli Avenue, and everybody could see it. I remember it very, very well. And Varazi, during his lifetime, he was very famous because he played Pirosmani's role. But besides it, he was a designer. He designed the exposition in the National Museum of Georgia. And this
Yeah, those my favorite cabinets for archaeology.
one of the best, not one of the, but I think the best,
Really best.
of that time. So
And it's
we
funny
knew
because-
him very well as a person who knew about his work, but we could not see all his works during his lifetime. And after that, it was possible to see it, to see everything.
It's also interesting because Thea Georgiadze refers to Varazi designed cabinets in her work. Because she specifically looked at the design, and he also would put color in the back of on the back of these cabinets. And Georgiadze specifically uses, if you look then at the shapes of her work, that like shelves, they're usually done in the shape or like inspired by the Varazi designed cabinets.
And we still have such shelves in the museum library of Krishashvili, which is made by Varazi.
Yeah, well, Grishashvili, well, because the Museum of Fine Arts destroyed them. They were throwing them away, and then I went.
Yes.
I went and I said, I called the museum and I said I would buy it because they were literally breaking them down in the yard. And I got one. I bought it from them with the permission of like administration, but I got one.
So you bought it, you
Yeah.
did it? I thought you wanted to do it.
I wanted, but I went and I thought, but they were breaking it down. So I asked them, you're going to take it out as a trash, give me one. And they said, no, it has to be. And then I went through the administration and I got it.
So you mean the cases from the archaeological exhibition? Okay, so it's from Janashia Museum.
No, from the Museum of Fine Arts on Pushkin Street, that one.
No.
I think, it was in Janashia Museum because I remember.
Yeah, but they brought it over there. That's where they were breaking it down.
Yeah,
But
maybe.
that's what it is.
But the exhibition was at Janashia Museum.
Yeah,
It's really great. I remember that too.
Yeah.
So.
But in Janashia, they still have it.
So you remember it? Do
Yeah.
you remember it?
Yeah.
So it was a great exposition, very impressive and very clear and very well done.
Yeah, I was a very little child, but I still remember it.
An art historian from beginning to end.
And I remember that in the center there was this sand with the pottery, different kind of potteries, and I also it was it was really nice to hear to see something which was very different from the other exhibitions. So yeah, should we wrap up?
I think so. I think that we could go on forever.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank to our audience who stayed with us despite all these technical difficulties. And also just I wanted to thank to Ketevan, Irena, Nikoloz, and Giorgi for being with us and for their amazing presentations. So Jane, I will leave it to you to close the.
Oh. Well, yes. So this is the end of our presentation, and I do hope that people will be able to come and see the show. It's just, I think, the first of many in the future, recurating and rethinking the art of this this period, based hopefully not just on what we have, but my goal in the long run is really to, of course, have loans and to move the works back to Georgia. You know, it'd be great to have a show that combined collections in Tbilisi. So let's just leave that as a positive future thought.
Yes.
And thank you again, all of you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. That was really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Sopon, Jane. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.